Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Burgee. I'm a member of the YANA board, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance YANA webinar series. This is number 8 of the series, and the title for today is Big Impact Leadership and Succession Planning for the Nonprofit Sector. And giving the lecture will be Vivien, Hoexter, and Linda Hartley. But first, before we begin, I'm going to talk a little bit about YANA itself. Over 110,000 Yale graduates are involved in the nonprofit sector as executive directors, practitioners, board members, donors, or volunteers. That's about 66% of the alumni population, but we believe it could be 100%. In order to achieve that goal, we work to enable collaboration and expand opportunities to anyone in the Yale community, be they students, alumni, faculty, and administration involved in nonprofits in any way. We also encourage and facilitate engagement among those who have not yet joined our ranks, and we communicate and celebrate the achievements of Yaleys everywhere who are willing to make an impact. We had just had a successful fundraising campaign for our Yale Dwight Hall Summer Fellowship that will support 3 students this summer that are interested in pursuing careers in nonprofit. And we also obviously encourage all participants today, please visit our website at Yale Nonprofit Alliance, all one word, .org, to please donate to maintain and enhance our programming and our mission. Before we begin, we'll talk a little bit about our speakers. Linda Hartley is a principal of H2Growth Strategies, providing counsel and planning, development, and governance to improve performance, increase revenues, and create lasting social impact for a more enlightened world. With her co-principal, Vivien and Hoexter, one of our board members, and 8 specialists, H2Growth has partnered with 100 nonprofits to raise over $1.5 billion. Vivien and Hoexter, the other principal of H2Growth Strategies, advises nonprofits and foundations on developing and refining strategies, marketing more effectively, and increasing both contributed and earning revenues. She also coaches executives currently in leadership roles and or transitioning into new ones. She brings 20 years of experience in nonprofit leadership roles. And as CEO of Gilda's Club Worldwide, she and her team have created a vision and strategic planning for other organizations as a leader in the field of emotional and social support for people with cancer and their families and friends. The organization increased its income by 55% in 2005 to 2006, and by 40% from 2006 to 2007. Both together in November 2017, they both wrote and published a book, their first book, Big Impact Insights and Strategies from America's Nonprofit Leaders. And without further ado, we'd like to welcome our guests today, Linda Hartley and Vivien Hoexter.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Liana Epstein, Lou Martirano, and Rachel Littman for their consistent, always friendly assistance in organizing this webinar. Today's topic is leadership and succession planning for the social sector, based on our recent book, Big Impact: Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. So before we get to the serious stuff, I'm going to tell you my favorite succession planning joke. So a new manager spends a week at her new office with the manager she's replacing. On the last day, the departing manager tells her, "I have left 3 numbered envelopes in the desk drawer. Open an envelope if you encounter a crisis you can't solve." 3 months down the road, there's a major drama in the office, and the manager feels very threatened by it all. She remembers the parting words of her predecessor and opens the first envelope. The message inside says, "Blame your predecessor." She does this and gets off the hook. About half a year later, the organization is experiencing a dip in revenue and there are serious program problems. The manager quickly opens the second envelope. The message reads, "Reorganize." She starts to reorganize and the organization quickly rebounds. 3 months later, next crisis, she opens the third envelope. The message inside says, "Prepare 3 envelopes." So with that, I know that's not going to happen to any of you. So what you can expect during this hour is Linda and I will present for about 45 minutes. answering some of the questions you posted through the survey. Thank you for your great questions. But as we start, I'm going to ask you a question and request that you answer it throughout the webinar using the chat function so that your peers can see what it is that you're saying. We'll try to allow for additional Q&A at the end. So change the slide.
Share screen.
Share screen, that would be good. Yeah, that's what I did. Who can share? Panelists. There we go. Okay. Let's close this, yes. Great. Okay, there we go. So, this is the question that I would like you to keep in mind and answer through the chat function as we go along. That question is, if tragedy struck and you could not serve in your current role going forward as of tomorrow, what is the one thing you would tell your successor? What is the one thing? So please post your answers and we will see what you think about this question. And one other thing, one additional request. If you like what you hear, please post comments on social media using our handle at H2Growth_ and the hashtag #BigImpactLeaders. So I mentioned that we recently wrote a book, and this presentation is loosely based on that book. The reason we wrote it is that we observed that there are hundreds of books about corporate leadership, but very, very few about nonprofit leadership. And we found none that feature leaders across the entire sector. We found books for Christian leaders, books for Jewish leaders, books for museum directors, but no books that cut across all of the verticals within the sector. Our contributors, nearly 50 of them, work in education, healthcare, religion, international causes, social services, arts and culture, environmental conservation, and social entrepreneurship. So as we were writing the book, we were reminded of how much good there is happening in the world and how underrepresented and underreported that good work is. And we hope that the stories we uncovered will become better known as a result of the book, and we hope that people will reach out to these organizations to volunteer and support them. So through the book, we discovered 7 principles for making social change, because the book is really about the relationship between leadership and social change. What does it take to make lasting social change if you're a leader? So the first principle we discovered, and this may seem obvious, but sharpen your leadership skills. The second, ensure that your own house, meaning your own organization, is in order. The third, be crystal clear about your goal and articulate it persuasively. The fourth, campaign on many fronts, not just one. Related to this, related to number 4, build broad-based coalitions across many sectors. Number 6, persist. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And 7, leverage your success by helping others. Since our focus today is on leadership and succession planning, we're briefly going to summarize principles 1 and 2, and also touch on number 5, build broad-based coalitions, because we think it's so critical to modern social sector leadership. If you want to know more about 3, 4, 6, and 7, you'll have to read the book. The principles are in this order for a particular reason. They start with the leader, from the leader's own perspective, sharpening the leader's own skills. Then they move outward to the leader's organization or house, and then beyond that to the people that the organization serves and society as a whole. So they're organized in that way for a very particular reason. So let's take a closer look at number one, sharpen your leadership skills. Of course, there are many, many aspects to this, and many books have been written about this. But from our interviews, a few stood out. The first is that you need to build your emotional intelligence and self-awareness. We were struck, in fact, really surprised, although we shouldn't have been, by the level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness that our leaders exhibited. The second thing we observed is that many of our leaders had worked in direct service and or abroad, and they thought that this was really an important step in developing their leadership skills and their ability to empathize with those they served. The third, they sought out and cultivated mentors, as Linda and I have done actively throughout their careers, not just at the beginning. On life balance, most of them said that they were trying to achieve life balance, but it was difficult. One famously said to us, there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's just life, and work is a part of it. And then some were unapologetically workaholics, just unapologetically. But most of them were really striving for balance, saying that it made them better leaders. And finally, and this is our primary topic today, these leaders were, in general, planning for the inevitable. They were planning for the transition to the next leader. They were succession planning, regardless of how long they had been in their roles. So what I'm going to do now is read a couple of quotes that are related to this topic of succession planning. This is one of our favorites. So this is Aria Finger, who is the CEO of DoSomething.org. Nancy Lublin is one of those people who lifts up everyone. I was 25 or 26, and she took me out for a hot chocolate. She said, "You're going to be the next CEO of Do Something. I'm grooming you to be the next CEO." I didn't believe her. I don't even remember if I said no, but I thought no. But she was true to her word. She has given me so much, and the only reason I'm successful today is because of her. So Do Something is a global movement for good, for those of you who don't know it. They have about 5.5 million young people making positive change, both online and off. They've done things like clothe half of America's youth in homeless shelters and cleaned up close to 4 million cigarette butts from the streets. So it's an organization that's really training young people to be active, engaged citizens. And this is sort of the ideal succession planning scenario. This conversation took place 10 years before Nancy Lublin, the founder of Do Something, decided to leave the organization and turn the reins over to Aria. So if you're looking for kind of the best case scenario, this is it. So when thinking about succession planning, as Nancy Lublin was, you want to be intentional. You want to make it clear that this is something that's important to you. It's important to the organization. It's going to start pretty much as soon as you move into your role, regardless how old you are and whether you think you're going to be there for a long time. And you're going to start, ideally going to start to train your successor right from the start, even if you have to hire that person first. So when you're ready to think about moving on, whether it's to retirement or to some or other organization, ideally, what you would do is review the environment in which your organization is operating at that time and the organizational goals. So if you have a strategic plan, this is a great time to be looking at it and seeing how things have changed or might change in the coming years. This is because what's required of the new leader is probably most likely going to be different from what was required of you when you took the job. Because things change, they change rapidly in our world. And particularly if you're a founder, you for almost certainly are going to want different qualities in your new leader. So for example, we did some work with a mental health organization where the CEO had been in her role for 22 years, almost the founder, not quite. And she was passing the reins to a young woman who was identified internally. And this young woman was going to, of course, continue the good work, but was also going to be much more of a fundraiser. So it really, and by looking at the strategic plan, we were able to see what that new leader was going to need. Then you're going to work with board and staff to take those qualities and put them into a job description for the new CEO or the new person in that role. And I say work with board and staff because, again, this is an open process, right? This is not something that happens in a dark room, right, with a closed door. And again, for those organizations where a founder is leaving the role, do consider sort of a senior advisor position for that person for some period of time, a defined period of time, maybe a year, so that, and this serves two purposes. It gives the retiring CEO a specific, well-defined role, and it also means that that person is around and available to help out the new CEO, at least for the first 6 months to a year. So Paula Kerger of PBS says, I'm a firm believer in the importance of having leaders in place who are prepared to take the helm. At PBS, we spend a lot of time on succession planning for key positions across the organization. Kerger also emphasized the importance of having a clearly designated number two, even if that person is not ultimately the one who will lead the organization. And this is very important because it may very well be that the new person has to come from outside the organization. We would like to think not. We'd like to think that there's someone internally. But even if there isn't, if there's someone who's been designated and is well known, it's well known to the board and the staff that this is the number two, then if something untoward happens and the CEO is not able to come to work tomorrow, everyone knows to whom to turn and there's less chance for confusion. So I'm going to, at this stage, I'm going to answer a few of the questions that we received through the pre-webinar survey. And I apologize in advance if we haven't picked up all of the questions. You'll have an opportunity at the end to pose them again. So we got a question, how do we implement succession planning without the current staff feeling threatened? So I should say the succession planning applies not just to the CEO role, but to all or most roles in the organization. So if everyone's doing succession planning, it's less threatening. Besides which, it might be threatening at first, but once people get used to the idea that this is something that's a best practice, that people document what they're doing in their roles, so that again, if they didn't show up to work tomorrow, someone would be able to pick up the pieces. So it's important that that it become part of the everyday business of the organization. We had a question about how to find a number two to succeed the CEO in a very small organization. Now, I'm not sure what's meant by very small. If there's only one staff person in the whole organization, and of course the new CEO is going to come from outside, what we would suggest in that instance is that there be someone on the board designated as the person who would step in to the role of the CEO for a short period of time before a new CEO could be found. And this also could apply to a small organization of up to 5 or 10 people where you don't have a clear number two in place or someone who's, all the other people are too junior, to have someone on the board who's agreed to take on that role for a specified period of time, like a year, I've seen that work quite well. So how far ahead, the next question we got was, how far ahead should we plan? And as I said earlier, ideally you'd be planning from the moment the new CEO comes into the role. Now, will that always happen? Probably not. But when the person's been in the role for a while, or when they start talking about retirement, or, you know, ideally you'd have at least several years to prepare for the departure of a CEO. And this again is what happened at the Mental Health Association. The CEO formally announced her retirement a year before she actually stepped down. So there was a good transition period. So then another question we got was, how can we have tangible checks and balances to avoid disarray during the transition? So ideally, again, you have some overlap between the new CEO and the current one, the one who's leaving. Not years, right? But maybe up to 6 months or a year. That could be long. Most corporations don't have that long a time period. But then you also need to have an intentional onboarding process for the new CEO, something that's written down and shared, and which allows the new CEO to meet all of the staff and all of the board, and have the wisdom of the current CEO about those folks before meeting them, while the current CEO is still there. And you also have to have a culture that really makes it clear that senior managers are expected to share information freely with the new CEO. This can be an issue sometimes, but in an organization that's planning for transition, it's less likely to happen than in others where they're not. Okay, so now you've sharpened your leadership skills to the point where they don't need to be sharpened anymore. And you're ready to ensure that your own house is in order. So this is the second step to making effective social change. Again, many, many steps toward doing this, but here are a few that stood out to us from our research. So everybody agrees that you have to recruit talented, passionate employees, but some of our interviewees had some actual good advice about how to do this. One of our favorites was that even when you're hiring for junior positions, make the potential employees come back a few times for interviews, not just once, right? So maybe they come for an interview, and then they come for a tour of a facility, and then they come for another interview, because they're much less likely to want to leave you quickly if they understand that they're going to have to jump through a few hoops in order to be hired. It's one way of assessing commitment, just one. So now you've hired as many talented, passionate employees as you possibly can. If you want to hold on to them, you might want to give them, or you better give them autonomy in decision making. Because really bright, talented people do not want to be told how to cross every T and dot every I. This is a very important one. One of the most interesting things, so this is address diversity and inclusion and keep addressing them. One of the most interesting things we were told by a number of our leaders was that once you start addressing diversity and inclusion in your organization, you can't ever stop. You have to keep addressing it from different angles. So it becomes part of your HR or other practice forever. And this is sort of an obvious one again, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are, but in practice, right, it's not so easy to do, right? It takes a fair amount of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, maturity to be able to hire people who are really smarter than you. But if you look at the great leaders in the nonprofit sector or elsewhere, this is what they have done, because they had enough self-confidence that they didn't feel the need to always be the smartest person in the room. Finally, what we noted is that these leaders were investing time in managing their boards. Even if they didn't have the time, they were investing time in managing their boards. Because Linda and I like to say that everything is easier when you have a strong board, because leadership is everything. And what in your organization, who are the top leaders, or they're your board members. So again, I'm going to read just a few quotes from some of our interviewees. So Tara Perry runs the National Court-Appointed Special Advocates for Children. She says, I express to people what they can bring to this work to help advance it. I have found that approach to be successful, so they aren't surprised when they look around for the wonderful accessories and tools. And here, if they come back a few times for interviews, then they probably are going to be committed. There are a couple of other things that are noteworthy about this statement. The first is that if people who are drawn to the nonprofit sector are mission driven, then when you're interviewing them, it's a good thing to tell them how they specifically are going to help you advance your mission and make sure that they really are mission driven. And so Tara is based in Seattle. She actually said to us, people here could go work at Amazon or Starbucks or Microsoft, where they could have lots of fancy accessories and tools. So what she's doing is she's warning them up front about the working conditions, right? She's not saying that, we work in bunkers, but on the other hand, she is saying that they're probably not going to have the very latest accessories and tools if they come to work for CASA. And then of course, she has them come back a few times. So Shale Polikow-Saransky, the president of Bank Street, was one of our favorite interviews. So he said, I was assigned to an internship with Eric Nadelstern, the principal of International High School in Queens. As a leader, Nadelstern is someone who believes deeply in autonomy as one of the most important preconditions for success. Working under him, I had a tremendous amount of flexibility and freedom to figure out how to get from point A to point B. I also had a lot of clarity around what was meant by point B. So this is one of the best descriptions I have ever heard of what it means to give your employees autonomy. And so Shale, a little bit of background here. Shale was teaching in New York City and went to Bank Street to get a leadership certificate or a degree. And he ended up doing his Bank Street internship under Eric Nadelstern. When Joel Klein became Chancellor of Schools under Mayor Bloomberg, he hired Nadelstern and Polikow-Saransky as his number 2 and number 3 people. And they opened 800 new schools, 800. And they took the graduation rate in New York City from 50% to 70%. I still get the chills when it's an extraordinary achievement, right? And one of the ways they did it was by adhering to this principle about giving bright people autonomy. So Stephen Hynes, another one of our favorites, he's the president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. And he told us, we found we were not as inclusive an organization as we thought we were or should be. I asked my staff, well, why don't those of you who are really interested in this or have some ideas or concerns get together and then come back and tell us what you think would be the right way to broaden and deepen the conversation. So when we had this conversation with Stephen, they were about 3 years into their diversity and inclusion work. And they had hired outside consultants, and the process had started from the top down, from Stephen's office. And what we found so interesting about this is that 3 years in, he was getting ready to sort of pass, he was going to stay involved, of course, but he was at a point where he thought he could have the process move from being top down to being more bottom up, right? So that asking the people on the staff who are really interested in this to go off and form a task force and come back and tell him or them what they thought they should be doing next. And as far as we know, that's exactly what happened. And then Theresa Younger, who's worked with a lot of CEOs and is herself the CEO of the Ms. Foundation for Women, famously said, CEOs rarely recognize that a board takes true board management and time. So if you're not spending as a CEO, 5 to 10% of your time managing your board, you're not spending enough time. And that's in addition to the 30 to 40% of your time that you're spending on fundraising, because that's really the way to ensure that your board not only feels taken care of, but is engaged by frequent contact with you. So with that, I'm going to pass the computer to my colleague, Linda. Thank you. Hi, everyone. All right. So now we're going to principle number 5, building broad-based coalitions. Let me introduce this topic a little bit more. As professionals and volunteers in the nonprofit sector here online with YANA and H2Growth, we're committed to contributing to the common good. Our collective aim is to leverage what we can do as individuals to forward a larger cause, whether it be social justice and human dignity, dismantling systemic discrimination, advancing education, science, culture, and world peace, building healthy communities, or saving lives and saving the planet. We asked many of the social impact leaders we interviewed, what was it about their change strategies that made them so successful? We also asked them several policy-oriented questions, including what was their organization doing internally and externally to create racial equity? What was the role of the nonprofit sector in bridging the urban-rural divide in this country? Some of the common threads to their answers were around building broad-based coalitions, seeking partnerships, leveraging their convening influence. I'm going to go through these quickly and then give you some examples. Another thread, common thread, was include communities of faith. Fundraise aggressively, no surprise. Engage with the nonprofit sector as a sector. Fred Blackwell, president and CEO of the San Francisco Community Foundation, said, "We aim to enlarge the circle and shine a light on what works and what doesn't. We want to use our influence to bring a new set of players to the table and hopefully tap into the passions and interests of Bay Area philanthropists so they will want to join." Blackwell's work is a brilliant example of seeking partnerships and leveraging convening power. He also said that the foundation is, quote, putting all their chips in the middle of the table around racial equity and inclusion in the region and focusing it on that for the next 10 years. He said, "I feel like it is the issue of the day. We have this fabulous economy where there's almost limitless opportunity, and it's almost a gold rush mentality here. But many people feel locked out. I feel like we are the canaries in the coal mine for the rest of the country. One of the things I'm excited about is attacking this with our grant making. We are talking to donors and leveraging our reputation, both our reputation and our grant making, to step into a more public role." Tara Perry from CASA, as Vivien noted, CEO of the National CASA in both Seattle and Washington. One of the things that she said is that one of the things the sector has struggled with is collaboration. If it were easy, people would do it. If we could start to approach things the way the corporate world does it, by merging and acquiring, the sector has to think about how you can partner, how you can joint venture in ways that take away the threat to grow and be stronger together. Another one of the leaders we interviewed was Jim Gibbons of Goodwill Industries. He said, one of the ways to take away the threat is for everyone to leave their ego at the table. CASA's mission is to ensure every abused and neglected child in the United States can be safe, have a permanent home, and the opportunity to thrive. Their impact has been very deep and very wide. Hundreds of thousands of children are helped by CASA volunteers. These children are more likely to succeed at school, and they are half as likely to re-enter the foster care system. Tara makes a good point here about collaborations and the several other ways both nonprofits and for-profits can join forces. Now, strategic restructuring can take many forms, from partnerships and joint ventures, and from management service organizations to full mergers. When it comes to fundraising, Tara brings a fresh perspective. She said, even if we think about traditional contributed revenue, no one has really thought about how to partner to raise money. This is an opportunity waiting for the sector. Hilary Pennington of the Ford Foundation posed this question to us when we asked her the questions. We are all more than one thing. So how do we think about multi-issue kinds of coalitions that are built around the idea that all people should thrive and have their dignity recognized? Last year, Pennington was named the Foundation's first executive vice president, overseeing all programs in the US and globally. She works closely with the Ford president, Darren Walker, on, quote, addressing the systems and forces that drive inequality. She framed the collaboration challenge in this excellent question, a question that leads people forward. And that's what leaders do when they ask good questions. They lead people forward. Brian McLaren of the Convergence Network. This is a great example of engaging faith-based organizations in building broad-based coalitions. Convergence is based in Atlanta, Georgia. He said to us, we need a historic, grassroots, bottom-to-top convergence of people of faith coming together in a vital spiritual and social movement. While this convergence must bridge traditions through multi-religious partnerships, it must also build movements of spiritual vitality and solidarity within all major traditions. It's in a hands-on deck moment, and everyone's engagement is needed to align their efforts and increase their effectiveness together. Convergence is described as a diverse, progressive collective of over 10,000 faith-based organizations, including leaders, artists, learners, and communities, all committed to action, and all for the people, the planet, and peace. That about covers it, doesn't it? The people, the planet, and peace. Leon Botstein, the president of Bard College and also a former boss and client, said that faith-based organizations are crucial allies in the fight against limiting refugees and deriding immigrants and foreigners. Communities of faith are critical to opening a welcoming and trusting relationship with our Mexican neighbors and protecting rights of people even if they are illegal immigrants. The Fifth and Fourth Amendments speak about persons, not citizens. And when it comes to engagement and the role of the social sector, Brian McLaren said, the challenge to me is helping people understand that our interests are intertwined. This is an important work for the social sector, and I think that we can accomplish that by helping people understand that our self-interest is connected to the well-being of others. I also think the development and empathy, compassion, and the concern for your neighbor is something that the social sector can and should be working on. Evan Wilson, one of our favorite people that we met in writing the book, a Yale alumnus as well. He's the founder of Freedom to Marry. It's an amazing success story through fundraising and coalition building. Freedom to Marry is one of the few nonprofits to close both its 501c3 and C4 after succeeding in its primary goal. He said that the idea to create
a multi-method, multi-state, multi-partner, multi-year campaign, and thus create a climate that would allow litigation groups to succeed. He began fundraising and trying to sell a vision of a campaign that would drive a strategy to a goal and leverage these different movements. He found a seed funder who believed in this vision. They took a leap of faith on a leader and a vision and gave what was, at the time, the largest single grant given to the gay movement. And they were giving it not to an organization, but to a guy with an idea. Wilson said that the effort took, the funder was the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund. Wilson said that the effort took decades, beginning in the late 60s, but made accelerated progress in the last decade because their strategy evolved. They learned about litigation. While it was essential, it was not winning hearts and minds. Again, this is about changing social norms. Their strategy included aggressive fundraising, and they did not ignore the rural areas of the country, helping to bridge and find common ground. They did not change everyone's mind in those areas, but by working in these areas, finding common ground, because everyone knew someone, a family, a friend, a family member who was gay. The language went from rights to freedom, and it was more about love than rights. As the campaign won legal and legislative victories in states across America, there was least resistance, if not support, for the idea of the freedom to marry for gays. Lastly, Wilson said, investing to scale in a sustained and affirmative campaign to a clear goal and strategy, and with good leadership, it pays off, even on a goal that seems unattainable, impractical, or impossible to many. Each of these elements are important. If you don't have to keep that much money, he said. It's more rewarding to make the world better and to be able to see it. Evan Wolfson now serves as a pro bono advisor to the National Immigration Law Center, which is his way of responding to requests about the lessons and elements of winning and how other movements can adapt and build on them. So giving back, leveraging your own influence. Now, to conclude, Vivien and I have presented just some of the principles, insights, and stories we've heard from the nearly 50 social impact leaders who contributed to our book, Big Impact. Our aim is to amplify their voices and share their successful strategies with people from all sectors, from leadership, planning, and management to policymaking, advocacy, and social change. Some of you may know that H2Growth just finished producing in Seattle the first summit on racial and economic equity there. Our work in social justice was inspired by the research for our book, Big Impact. And if you'd like to hear more about future plans for equity convenings across the country over the next 2 years, send us a postcard. No, I'm kidding. Send us a note, an email. And now we have plenty of time for questions. I'm going to start that off with a few questions from our online audience that were submitted last week. Here are 3 responses to one of our questions, all centering really on board succession and recruitment. The question was, what is your biggest management challenge right now? There were 3 responses. Number 1 just simply wrote, board chair replacement. Number 2, move from a small mom and pop founder run organization to a large department-based organization. And the 3rd challenge was finding talent to groom for succession. So for 1 and 2, replacing the board chair and moving a founder run organization to a larger one. We don't have a lot of information behind these responses, but if the board chair is stepping down and no one on the board wants the position, and or there are no current board members that are viewed as qualified to take the position as chair, it's time to invest time working with the board on a strategic plan to include a review of board governance and a succession plan. Turn the challenge into an opportunity. to create the clarity, consensus, and commitment to a shared vision for not only the organization, but for the board itself. This is not a long-term planning process. We define vision here for this particular kind of planning is where you want the vision of the organization for where you want the organization to be in the next 3 years, 5 years tops. Encourage your board to play an active role in refining the board structure and expanding the capacity of the board over the next 1 to 3 years. If the board chair is a founder, he, she, they would have the opportunity to affirm their legacy and see their own successful strategies that got them to this point being transferred to the next generation of board leaders. Self-made billionaire Alan Gary founded and built the Beltherwood Center for the Arts. It's now a 16,000 seat amphitheater on the site of the original Woodstock Festival, which happened 50 years ago this year. They were also a client. The center was operated as a project of his foundation, Alan Gary's foundation, a project. We worked with him and the CEO, Darlene Verdun, to create a 501c3 and independent board, all within an operating performing arts center and a $15 million annual budget. When we initially spoke with the founder about creating a 5-year plan, he said, "I don't have 5 years." So not a fan of long-term planning. The initial class of board members that we recruited agreed to a high give-get, especially for Sullivan County, $50,000. We wanted the board to skip the founding board phase and become a governing board right away with skin in the game, where there would be mutual respect between the founder and the new board. We created a compelling case for support for the new nonprofit, prepared a comprehensive recruitment package for board members, and then worked with the CEO in recruiting the first 8 board members, raising $400,000 in the first 18 months, on top of the $1.2 million that they were already raising at the time. So another thing that you can do short term is to spread out the responsibilities of the board chair over 3 people, the vice chair or president-elect. That's a really good role to have in place, the chair, and the immediate past chair. If the board chair cannot stay any longer, you could try filling that position as an acting or interim chair role, as Vivien had mentioned. Other structural changes that can help you build out your board's leadership capacity. You can review the bylaws. There are sometimes one of my favorite bosses at the New School, the president, Jonathan Fanton, who became president of the MacArthur Foundation afterwards. The first thing he did when he joined as president at the New School was to just double the number of board members, so that it just wasn't an issue. It's not that you had to double the board. It's just that the ceiling was lifted. It just wasn't an issue anymore. We raised there, over a period of 10 years, $200 million. And in the beginning, we really didn't know where that money was going to come from. It came, in the end, 50% of it came from the board. And that was over a long period of engaging, cultivating, and recruiting new board members. Another tactic is to just allow continuous terms. And as I said before, creating a president-elect or board chair-elect is also a good tactic. So I'm going to leave that. Oh, and in terms of recruiting, in answering that, would we help nonprofits recruit board members? We first look at the composition of the board, and we take a look to try to understand what the composition is now. Then we work with the organization in creating the kind of composition that makes sense for them going forward. So you're looking at the types of people rather than individuals or people you know. piece of advice is to aim high. Ren Levy said at Lincoln Center that if everyone was saying yes to the nominating committee there, they weren't aiming high enough. So I'll leave it there.
So are there other questions? Lou, is there a way to see if there are questions coming in?
Yeah, the Q&A box, the chat box, and the raise hand. Two comments in chat earlier.
Okay, Q&A. No open questions. Okay. Oh, okay. Would you let me know if you have questions?
Oh, this is sharing
Yes,
their advice.
So this
Thank
was
you,
this was
James.
the one we asked at the beginning. We asked you to think about what is the one piece of advice you would give your successor, and some of our participants are answering that question by keeping the focus on client service and by maintaining donor confidence in the NGO's mission through due diligence, I think. And so thank you very much for that. What I'd like to ask is if people could send in questions that would, yes, the answer is yes, you can rewatch the video at another time. It will be archived on the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance website. It'll be up by next week. It won't be up immediately. So are there?
Do you want to look at the other questions that were sent yesterday?
Yeah, yeah, it'd be good if you could pull them up. The website address is Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance.org. So the full name, Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance.org. And we're looking for, there were some additional questions that were asked late yesterday. Liana, yes, of course.
In terms of training leadership, what sorts of programs do you recommend for leaders?
Training in what area?
Let's say increasing leadership capacity. It's a more general proposition.
Got it. There's some folks in the room here with us, and Lou asks, what resources do we recommend for training nonprofit leaders in management and leadership? So there are lots of different ways to do this, right? What we observe in the nonprofit sector is that there's not a lot of money allocated for professional development. So one of the most interesting solutions to this that we've seen is at the Gay Men's Health Crisis, which actually won a Nonprofit Excellence Award for its human resources practices last year or the year before. And what they had done, now they're relatively big. I think they have about 400 employees. And what they did was they created a GMHC university, staffed entirely by their people, their staff members. They have a very well-oiled performance management process. So they're constantly looking at what are the skills that large numbers of people within the organization have and others that they need to develop. And so through that mechanism, they're able to identify areas where training is needed. And then they put out a call to the staff to see who has expertise in that area, whether it could be, because we were talking about management and leadership, it could be around performance management, it could be around hiring, it could be around learning how to create a strategic plan, for example. That's something that leaders need to know how to do. So that was one of the most creative solutions that we've encountered. If your organization is smaller, you can join an organization like the Nonprofit Coordinating Committee or the Support Center for Nonprofit Management, which have large numbers of smaller organizations that belong to them. And they provide trainings to members of various types, right, throughout the year. And they're often, if you're a member, the trainings are either free or low cost. And depending, some of them are of higher quality than others. It depends on who the lecturer is that particular day. But it's better than not having any training at all. And these organizations do have, the NPCC does a lot of advocacy. The Support Center for Nonprofit Management does a lot of technical assistance and actually has sort of a shared services component. So if you're small and you don't have your own insurance, for example, health insurance, or you can get insurance of various types through either of those organizations. So they're great resources. Not enough people know about them. Thanks. Okay. Okay, so referring back to a few of the questions from yesterday, how do we convince other members of the board that we need to do succession planning? And okay, so let me take that one first. So this can be a challenge, right? If your board is engaged, they're probably not asking you this question, right? Because they'll understand the importance of thinking about the future. If your board is less engaged, I think the thing to do is maybe you bring in someone from the outside to talk to them about it. Sometimes that's an effective way of doing it. Or you bring in case studies of places where it's gone right and where it's gone wrong. In other words, where there hasn't been a good succession plan. But in our experience, you really have to work at it, meaning that you might have to introduce the topic several times over a period of a year or so to really begin to change the minds of unengaged board members. So the other question that we're looking at is, you want to take this one? Okay. So how do we get competent people to chip in and help do the work? That's in response to what is your biggest management challenge right now? I'm not sure whether that means staff or board. I'm assuming it means board. So in our experience, again, boards often are about a third, and a third. You have a third that's highly engaged, a third that's quasi-engaged, and a third that's not engaged at all, or very little. Maybe they show up at meetings. And we don't recommend trying to push people off boards, right? What we recommend is, as Jonathan Fanton did, expanding the number of spots on the board and recruiting new board members with in classes of at least 3, and recruiting them with different expectations than the current board members have had, right? So you have the most leverage with a prospective board member before they say yes, and even before you invite them, right? So often, if you can bring on a class of at least 3, then some of the board members who are not engaged will begin to turn around because they'll be inspired by those who are doing the work. And some of them may take themselves off the board. I'm not saying you shouldn't try to get your current board members engaged. You should, but you also have to be realistic about that. And ways to get your current board members engaged is in my experience, connect them with the mission. If you can get them to go out and visit your school, or visit your hospital, or visit your summer camp, or visit, and if you can't, have clients come into your board meetings, right? Every board meeting should have a mission component, right? Where someone who represents the mission comes in and talks, and or where there's education going on about some aspect of your mission. So I'm seeing that we are out of time. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us. We've had a good time. We hope you've learned a thing or two. And until the next webinar, so long.